The sentencing hearing has just wrapped up for former fashion mogul Peter Nygard. The 83-year-old multimillionaire has been found, as of last year, guilty of 4 counts of sexual assault. Today we found out about the sentencing. CBC's Megan Fitzpatrick was inside the courthouse just a few moments ago. She's out now. She's ready to join us. Megan, what do you know?
Hi, Natasha. So Peter Nygard has received an 11-year sentence for those 4 convictions of sexual assault. Jury finding him not guilty last November. He was also acquitted on 1 count of sexual assault and 1 count of forcible confinement. So it's an 11-year sentence minus the time served that he's already been in custody. That's leaving Nygard with about 6.7 years left to serve in his sentence. He was arrested in 2021 on these charges. So the judge sort of laying out some of the math, Natasha, in terms of what this means for how much longer Nygard will spend behind bars. The judge noting that he will be eligible to apply for full parole in about 27 months. That doesn't mean he will get parole. That just means he'll be able to apply for it at that time. So with this sentence, Natasha, it means he will be serving this sentence in a federal institution. He has so far been in custody in a provincial institution, and that's where he wanted to stay. But that's not going to happen. He will be transferred to a federal institution. Just in terms of what happened in the courtroom, I can tell you Nygard was there in person. He had applied to court to not be there in person for this sentencing hearing. He had argued that that would put his health at risk, should be transferred from where he's being held in custody to the courthouse. That request had been rejected by Justice Robert Goldstein. So he was in the courtroom. He was dressed in a thick black puffy winter-like jacket and a black hooded sweatshirt type garment over his head, and he was wearing that white makeshift visor that he has worn in many of his court appearances because of his glaucoma and vision problems. It was hard for me to see his face from where I was sitting and see an actual reaction, if he had any, to the sentence when Justice Goldstein read it. At the beginning of the sentencing decision, he was asked if he wanted to say anything, and he declined that opportunity. Now, in terms of why the judge arrived at 11 years, he went through some of his reasons. He didn't read the whole decision word for word, but he read some of the highlights, explaining some of the factors that he took into consideration when arriving at this sentence. So one of them being the time span. These assaults happened over a number of years, dating back to the 1980s up until about the mid-2000s, and Justice Goldstein said that was a demonstration that Nygard never modified or changed his behavior, the fact that he conducted these assaults over a number of years. He took into consideration also Justice Goldstein saying the nature of these sexual assaults, saying all sexual assaults are violent, but he described in some graphic detail what had happened in these particular assaults and the level of force and aggression he said Nygard used against these women, and also the level to which he humiliated and degraded his victims, things he said to them during the assaults. Justice Goldstein saying he took that into account as well. Also the age of one of the victims. She was 16 years old when Nygard sexually assaulted her. So Justice Goldstein taking that into consideration, and as part of his decision, he said Nygard treated that young woman as a toy for his benefit and that of his guests. He pointed to the victim impact statements that we heard in court as part of the sentencing hearings. Some of the women did read statements describing the trauma and the long-lasting impacts that these assaults had on them, the health effects that they have suffered as a result, the impact that the assaults had on their careers, their personal relationships. So Justice Goldstein talking about that. He also pointed to the letters of support that Nygard had submitted to court from people he knows, from friends who were urging the judge to impose a more lenient sentence. Justice Goldstein saying in his ruling that he only took those letters of support with a grain of salt and he gave them limited weight. In terms of Nygard's age and health. These were big considerations here. Nygard is currently 83 years old, and he does have a long list of health problems, and he had argued that his health has deteriorated significantly since he was arrested and put in custody. Justice Goldstein saying he's an older man. These kinds of health effects would happen anyway, quite likely, regardless of whether he was in custody or not. And he will continue to deteriorate because he is an older man. And he also said that Nygard is prone to hyperbole and exaggeration. So he didn't quite accept everything that Nygard and his lawyers had tried to argue when it came to just how much his health is suffering. And also the judge rejecting the notion that he's been subject to harsh conditions while in custody. Rather the opposite, Justice Goldstein saying Nygard's actually gotten very special treatment while in custody. So that was not a factor he was taking into consideration. These are some of the reasons that went into that decision, Natasha. Again, the headline here is an 11-year sentence for Peter Nygard. This sentencing hearing was a long-awaited one. It was almost 1 year ago that he was found guilty on these 4 counts. The decision delayed multiple times because Nygard changed lawyers multiple times. He had a very high-profile defense lawyer, Brian Greenspan, defending him at trial, but they parted ways earlier this year. He then hired another lawyer. That didn't last very long. They separated. Then he hired a third lawyer that has represented him for this last portion of this lengthy legal process. And as we know, Nygard is also facing charges in other jurisdictions, both in Manitoba and in Quebec and in the United States. He's facing an extradition order to the United States once his next Canadian trials are wrapped up. Natasha?
CBC's Megan Fitzpatrick in Toronto. Thank you.